The Buffalo and Susquehanna Railroad was a railroad company that formerly operated in western and north-central Pennsylvania and western New York states. It was created in 1893 by the merger and consolidation of several smaller logging railroads. It operated independently until 1929, when a majority of its capital stock was purchased by the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. At the same time, the B&amp also purchased control of the neighboring Buffalo, Rochester, and Pittsburgh Railway. The Baltimore and Ohio officially took over operations of both roads in 1932. In 1954, the Buffalo and Susquehanna Railroad and its remaining subsidiaries were formally merged into the Baltimore and Ohio system. Then in 1956, the Baltimore and Ohio sold the remaining 97 miles of former Buffalo and Susquehanna track to the H.E. Salzburg Company, who organized the Wellsville, Addison, and Gaylton Railroad to operate the line. The line was finally abandoned in 1979. The Buffalo and Susquehanna Railroad was created and constructed by Frank H. Goodyear, a Buffalo fuel dealer, to move his lumber and coal from north-central Pennsylvania to his businesses and companies in Buffalo, New York. The line was started in Keating Summit, PA, and extended into Gaylton, where it branched off to Wellsville, Addison, and Ansonia. The Wellsville branch was briefly extended to Buffalo, New York. Near Keating Summit, the line was extended south from Wharton, through Dubois, terminating 75 miles south at Sagamore, Pennsylvania. At its peak, the railroad ran 250 miles from Buffalo to Sagamore, Pennsylvania, and had more than 400 miles of track. Initial acquisitions. In 1885, Frank H. Goodyear, a Buffalo lumber and fuel dealer, bought thousands of acres of virgin hemlock timberland in north-central Pennsylvania. Up until the 1880s, the lumber industries mostly avoided hemlock due to its ring-shaking and high knot content, instead choosing to go after the more solid pine and spruce forests. But with most of the other local competing softwoods forests already denuded, there was now a growing local demand for the cheaper hemlock. At the same time, the lack of good waterways to float the lumber to the mills made this location less than ideal for standard operations by experienced lumber operators of the time. To extract the lumber from his new investment, Goodyear first organized the Cinemahoning Valley Railroad. This line ran from Keating Summit, Pennsylvania on the Buffalo, New York and Amp, Philadelphia Railroad to his sawmill in Austin, Pennsylvania. The Cinemahoning Valley Railroad ran from Keating Summit east to a switchback and then south down the north branch of Freeman Run toward Austin. The Cinemahoning Valley Railroad opened officially as a common carrier on December 14, 1885. Although most of the lumber railroads of the time and area were three-footers, Goodyear used his foresight in building his logging railroads of permanent quality to a standard gauge and laid with 70-pound rail, which really paid off in the future. In Austin, Pennsylvania, Goodyear built a huge sawmill, and brought all his timber here by rail to get cut. Then in 1886 he extended the line 13 miles south to Costello, Pennsylvania, where there was a large sole leather tannery. The leather tanneries used the hemlock bark, which was a byproduct of the sawmills, to create tannin. This allowed him to benefit greatly by supplying one industry with the waste product of another. In 1887 he joined with his brother to create the firm of F.H.&Amp, C.W. Goodyear. In the end, it was this firm that owned most of the properties, mills, railroads, locomotives and many other assets. Starting in 1891, the Cinemahoning Valley Railroad would be extended northwest up past Gaylton all the way to Ansonia, where it would make a connection with the Fallbrook Railway. To get here, the railroad had to cross a large ridge. To accomplish this, the railroad built 4 large switchbacks, instead of tunnels. This may have been acceptable thinking at the time, as the line was still primarily a logging railroad, where switchbacks were quite common. These switchbacks would limit trains to 15 cars. Starting in the early 1890s, an initiative was started to build a number of smaller lines linking the Cinemahoning Valley Railroad at Costello, up to Gailton and east to Ansonia. At this point there already was a narrow-gauge line running from Gailton northeast up to Addison. The Addison and Pennsylvania Railway was started in 1882 from Addison, reaching Gaines and Gailton by 1885. In 1891, the Buffalo and Susquehanna Railroad Company was started in Gailton and headed southwest 14 miles to Cherry Springs, Pa. Cherry Springs is at the top of the hill, between both sets of switchbacks. At the same time, in 1891, the Susquehanna Railroad Company connected the Cinemahoning Valley Railroad at Costello, heading northeast to Hull, 14 miles away. This line went from Costello, south to Wharton, then northeast up to Conrad. Conrad was Hull Station. Both of those lines were completed by 1893, when the Cherry Springs Railroad Company was created and completed the connection of 9 miles from Hull to about 2 miles from Cherry Springs, Pa. The Cherry Springs Railroad literally connected the 14-mile Buffalo and Susquehanna Railroad with the 14-mile Susquehanna Railroad. This connecting line proceeded northwest from Conrad up the hill to just past the first switchback to the top of the hill at Cross Fork Junction. The Cross Fork Railroad Company would have connected here at the top of the hill and proceeded 13 miles back down the hill south to the logging boom town of Cross Fork. Cross Fork would grow quickly to have 2,500 residents at its peak. Started in 1892, the Coudersport and Wellsboro Railroad Company was now finished in 1893, building east from Gailton to Ansonia, Pa, where they would make a connection with the Fallbrook Railway. In 1893, now that all the little lines were finished, the Buffalo and Susquehanna Railroad was created as a result of the merger of the Cinemahoning Valley Railroad, the Buffalo and Susquehanna Railroad Company, the Susquehanna Railroad, the Cherry Springs Railroad, and the Cross Fork Railroad. At this point, the Buffalo and Susquehanna Railroad's main line now started with a connection with the Buffalo, New York and B&amp, Philadelphia Railroad at Keating Summit. Utilizing a small switchback, it proceeded southeast, past Austin and Costello, where at Wharton the line would proceed northeast up the grade. About 14 miles south of Gailton, 4 large switchbacks were required to get over the ridge and into Gailton. The main line continued past Gailton and made a connection with the Fallbrook Railroad at Ansonia. The main offices for the Buffalo and Susquehanna assumed the old offices of the Cinemahoning Valley in Austin, PA. Construction and expansion. The Buffalo and Susquehanna Railroad now extended 62 miles from Keating Summit to Ansonia, with a 13-mile branch to the booming logging town of Cross Fork. By 1893, it is reported that Frank Goodyear owned 10 locomotives. The line was served by a number of Shea logging locomotives based out of Austin, Pa, as well as a Baldwin 280 locomotive. With the expansion into Gailton, the Buffalo and Susquehanna Railroad now needed more locomotives, and purchased 11 new locomotives in 1894 and 1895. Many construction railroads and temporary lines were being built by the B&amp S, or the F, H, and amp CW Goodyear Company, or the lumber companies themselves, to service the timber transport in the area. The Lackawanna Lumber Company, Emporium Lumber and Central Pennsylvania Lumber Company all used the main lines of the Buffalo and Susquehanna Railroad tracks with their equipment. Most of these companies were owned or partnered with the Goodyear brothers. As the lumber and tanning business expanded, Frank Goodyear was joined by his brother Charles W. Goodyear. Upon reorganization, Frank Goodyear stepped down as president of the railroad and assumed the positions of first vice president and chairman of the board. Goodyear's brother, Charles, became second vice president and general manager of the railroad, while Marlon Olmsted became president. In 1895 to 1896, the B&amp SRR Company built a 37-mile extension northwest from Gailton to Wellsville, NY, where the B&amp S now connected with the New York, Lake Erie and Amp Western. The Goodyears had purchased timberlands along the Pine Creek, north of Gailton, a few years previous, and now it was time to start logging those properties. Very soon the Goodyear brothers would also build a large lumber mill in Gailton. Also, at Wellsville, there operated a short line called the Wellsville, Coudersport and Pine Creek Railroad. It ran south about 10 miles from Wellsville to Hickox. It was a small operation with plans of eventually extending south to Coudersport. The WCPC was forced to lease the railroad to the B&amp S under threat of a parallel track. It was leased on January 1, 1896 for 85 years at $8,250 a year. The B&amp S acquired their only locomotive. As of 1896, the B&amp S had 16 locomotives, 14 passenger cars and almost 760 freight cars. Along this northwestern line to Wellsville, about halfway from Gailton to Genesee, there existed a 5-mile stretch of very severe grades, with a peak grade of 2.84%. Many curves and twists were used to get over the hill, requiring the B&amp S to use multiple engines on even average-sized trains. In 1895, the original narrow-gauge line that ran from Gailton to Addison, the Addison and Pennsylvania Railroad, converted from narrow gauge to standard gauge. This would help simplify interchange and operations in the Gailton area, as the B&amp S was driving a lot of business in the area, and the Addison and Pennsylvania Railroad was hoping to get a bigger share of the traffic. This would not be the case, as Frank Goodyear had other plans. Starting on March 18, 1896, the Buffalo and Susquehanna Railroad had extended from Addison into Corning, New York via trackage rights over the Fallbrook Railroad. The Buffalo and Susquehanna Railroad would pay the Fallbrook Railroad 14 cents per ton for the 43 miles to get to Corning, New York. This implies that the Buffalo and Susquehanna did not use the original line that ran from Gailton to Addison, the Addison and Pennsylvania Railroad, instead having a trackage agreement with the Fallbrook Railroad. Addison is right next to Corning, and both would have given the B&amp S an interchange with the New York, Lake Erie and Amp Western, for markets east. This may have been intentional. By keeping B&amp S freight off the end amp P, Goodyear would help keep the line underutilized and keep its stock price low. Also, the Fallbrook Railroad directly competed with the Addison and Pennsylvania Railroad, as they both served Westfield, Knoxville, and Elkland, as the two ran parallel to one another. Eventually, in 1898, the Goodyear brothers would now purchase the 45-mile Addison and Pennsylvania Railroad running from Gailton, PA to Addison, NY. At this time, the Buffalo and Susquehanna Railroad Railroad built the half-mile connector track at Gaines Junction to link this new line with their existing line from Gailton to Ansonia, and abandoning the 4.5 miles of parallel track that ran from Gaines to Gailton, with the Buffalo and Susquehanna Railroad now owning a direct route to Addison, New York. The trackage rights agreement for traffic into Corning, New York with the Fallbrook Railroad was allowed to expire on June 1, 1898. One wonders if the Fallbrook Railroad ever knew of the Buffalo and Susquehanna's real intentions. At this point, a business partner now became a direct competitor, as the B&amp now competed directly with traffic into the Corning area, as well as the parallel track in Westfield, Knoxville, and Elkland. It wouldn't matter much by then anyway, as the Fallbrook Railroad was leased into the New York Central and Hudson River Railroad in 1899, with the hub of activities now greatly centered on Gailton. In 1894 to 1898, the B&amp moved its base of operations from Austin to Gailton and began construction of a large yard, six-stall engine house, car repair shop, freight and passenger station. This included new and modern brick structures. Around this time, there was another railroad that connected from Germania to Gailton, the Gailton South Branch and Germania Railroad, which was probably a small logging railroad. Also at this time, the lumber mill operations of Gailton were beginning to surpass the huge operations in Austin. By 1899, the Buffalo and Susquehanna Railroad was reported to have modern and very comparative facilities with a total of 19 locomotives, 10 consolidations of 70 to 98 tons, 4 10-wheelers of about 65 tons, all Baldwins except one, 5 8-wheelers. FH and AMP, CW Goodyear Co., was reported to have an additional 12 shays for use by the lumber companies. By the late 1890s, the operations of the Goodyear's lumbering company was noted as being the most extensive in the state of Pennsylvania. The mills at Austin, Gailton, and Cross Fork were the most modern in style, and included all the newest and most up-to-date machinery. The mill at Austin was listed as the largest in the state. The Goodyears employed 2,400 men, working 10 hours a day. They owned 11 log loaders manufactured by the Marion Steam Shovel Co. 5 shay engines moved 207 log cars. One shay locomotive would handle 2 log loaders and about 30 log cars. There were 75 miles of logging railroads, which were constantly moved around to uncut parts of the forest. These logging railroads then connected with the Buffalo and Susquehanna Railroad. It was reported in 1898 that the Goodyears had 10 years' worth of timber left. Some of the mills operated 22 hours per day, and used electric lights to keep the men working at night. In Cross Fork, the Lackawanna Lumber Company had 2 mills. They operated 2 standard locomotives, 2 shay locomotives, 3 log loaders, with a total of 70 log cars. Almost 20 miles of rail had been built by the Lackawanna Logging Company at Cross Fork, who also constantly moved the tracks to fresh areas to be cut. In addition, uncut logs were also brought into Cross Fork by the Buffalo and Susquehanna Railroad from other nearby areas. In 1900, the Buffalo and Susquehanna was reported to have 22 locomotives, 17 passenger cars, 761 freight cars, south for coal and lumber. By 1901, the Buffalo and Susquehanna Railroad built an extension from the main line at Wharton, Pennsylvania, south through Cinnamahonic, Pennsylvania, connecting with the Philadelphia and Amp Erie Railroad near Driftwood, Pennsylvania. This line was then extended further south to the area of Dubois Park. In 1902 to 1905, The line to Dubois was full of new opportunities for the Goodyear brothers. Halfway between Driftwood and Dubois was a small town named Medics Run, Pennsylvania. This area is located near the current Moshannon State Forest, and became a big lumbering town for the Goodyear brothers and the Buffalo and Susquehanna Railroad. Medics Run was already established as a small lumbering and coal center before the Buffalo and Susquehanna Railroad came. In 1893, the Medics Run Lumber Company was built, and in 1894, a small tannery was built. By 1895, the Medics Run Railroad was built for almost 12 miles to a local coal mine. By 1905, as the Buffalo and Susquehanna Railroad was being built past Medics Run, the Goodyear brothers bought the existing mill, the Medics Run Railroad, and 20,000 acres of local forest. Frank Goodyear relocated his original Shay locomotive, No. 1, from Wellsville, NY to Medics Run, to assist in the busy lumbering operations. Also, later, Shay No. 12 was officially moved to Medics Run, as operations picked up. By 1906, the Goodyear brothers were now the largest lumber company as a whole, and had the first and second highest producing mills in all of Pennsylvania, with the fourth busiest mill being in Medics Run. The productivity of the Goodyear lumber mills for 1906 is listed below: Gailton 92 million feet, Austin 72 million feet, Medics Run 50 million feet, Cross-Fork Lackawanna Lumber Co. 69 million feet, southwest of Medics Run. The area was rich in bituminous coal, which would become the Goodyear brothers' next major interest. To supplement the lumbering interests, by 1905, the Buffalo and Susquehanna Railroad had extended 55 miles south to Sykesville, Pennsylvania, with plans to continue south into the larger coal regions. At the same time, the Goodyear brothers started buying up coal mines in the area. Earlier, the Buffalo and Susquehanna Railroad Company had bought the property of the Clearfield Coal Company in Tyler, PA in 1901 and subsequently created the Buffalo and Susquehanna Coal Company. In 1902, some coal properties of the Bow and White Coal Mining Company were purchased by the Buffalo and Susquehanna Coal Company near Dubois, as well as lands from the Peel, Peacock, and Kerr Coal Company, some 10 miles south of Dubois. In 1903, the gross earnings had reached $1 million for the year ending June 30, with net earnings being $432,000, and the surplus being $138,000. Significantly, heavier traffic had increased their operating costs as compared to 1902, including increases in salaries, while at the same time their insurance went up, as the valuation went up. By 1904, the Buffalo and Susquehanna Coal and Coke Company was the sixth largest mining company in the region, with 284,000 tons mined. Overall, there was a 25% increase in bituminous coal mining since 1900. By 1905–1906, the Buffalo and Susquehanna Railroad owned most of the stock and bonds of the Buffalo and Susquehanna Coal and Coke Company and Powhatan Coal and Coke Company. Addition purchases and mining rights brought the Buffalo and Susquehanna Coal and Coke Company's assets to an estimated 120 million tons of coal. The largest of the Buffalo and Susquehanna Coal and Coke mines would be at the southern end, in Sagamore, Pennsylvania, where an estimated 2 million tons per year could be mined from this single drift mining plant alone. To reach the largest coal holdings at Sagamore, Pennsylvania. The Buffalo and Susquehanna Railroad had to build southwest of Dubois, and then lease trackage rights from the Buffalo, Rochester and Pittsburgh Railway Company, for a distance of 16 miles between Stanley, part of Juneau, PA. The B&amp had to use the tracks of the B&amp P with a 20-year lease agreement. The 21 miles from Juneau to Sagamore were owned and operated by the B&amp. It is unclear why the Goodyears had to accept this agreement to run the B&amp on the B&amp P's tracks between Stanley and Juneau. It seems to go against everything the Goodyears were trying to accomplish. The town of Sagamore didn't exist before the Buffalo and Susquehanna came, so when in late fall 1905, the railroad was completed to the area, the first couple of trains were used by the Hyde-Murphy Company to ship in materials for the construction of the first 90 houses in Sagamore. Building would continue as needed, and by the 1920s, 500 houses would be built. The Sagamore mine was built with the most modern equipment and of the highest capacity. The mine operation was built for an anticipated production of 10,000 tons per day, which would have equaled 3 million tons per year. Needless to say, this production number was never met. By 1907, the production of the Sagamore mine was quickly catching up to the production of the Dubois mines, both averaging over 500,000 tons per year. Total production for 1907 was listed as almost 1.1 million tons of coal, which would amount to about 27,500 fully loaded 40-ton coal cars being shipped per year on the Buffalo and Susquehanna Railroad. In 1907, the mine in Medig's Run was closed and abandoned. Production at the Sagamore mines would continue to increase steadily every year. By 1914, the Sagamore mines had reached third place in production, compared to all the other mines in the local districts. Total production at Sagamore was now 794,277 tons out of almost 1.3 million tons. That total would amount to about 32,500 coal cars for the Buffalo and Susquehanna per year, or about 90 cars per day.